Okay, so I wear sometimes or often I wear a cross, and yet I don't strictly consider myself as a Christian. So obviously not obviously, but I was baptized as Christian, grew up in a Christian household. My mother works at the church near me, so I'm somewhat inclined, and my environment has shaped me to have a Christian lifestyle and a Christian upbringing. And yet I don't necessarily consider myself as a Christian, but I still also don't see it as hypocritical to wear a cross. And I think it's because of my somewhat nuanced views on religion. Now, I don't think I've got it all figured out. Obviously, I don't. No one has it all figured out, and I'm not even saying that I've got it the most figured out, because there's people that know way more than me. But I think I've come a long way in terms of my understanding of religion and my specific faith and why I believe in it. So hopefully you find it interesting. I'm just going to talk about it, and maybe you glean something from it too. But that's not necessarily the point. I just want to talk about this. So let's start with where I started. So I started as a Christian kid, not necessarily very religious, didn't really go to church, went to church on occasions where special church occasions, like I went for Easter, Christmas, that type of thing. But I was not necessarily a devout Christian, and I don't claim to know all that much about Christianity. Haven't read the Bible myself, for example. Okay, and then I started moving away from that, and I started developing some skepticism, similarly to how a child develops skepticism about whether Father Christmas exists, whether the Easter Bunny exists. So I started to develop skepticism about whether God exists, and about what God actually is, if I am to say it exists or not, and what form should God take. And so naturally, growing up, being inclined towards science and STEM subjects more so than linguistic-based subjects or subjects with more scope for interpretation, I had a tendency to doubt these types of things. How can Jesus walk on water? I would think. How can these stories that I'm hearing in the church, how can these stories that I hear of about religions, Islam, Hinduism, how can Hanuman be the form of a monkey, take the form of a monkey and still speak? And this all seemed completely ridiculous to me. It seemed much more like a cult than anything else. And I think a lot of people have those views, which is what shifts a lot of people away from religion towards atheism, or maybe agnosticism, if that's the correct way to say it. I'm not sure. But anyways, it's basically they doubt religions because of the metaphorical structure that they take. They teach lessons in metaphors, and so, or at least that's the way I think of it. Some people think of them as literal events. I'm not inclined to think of them as literal events for obvious reasons. And a lot of people are inclined to think the same way as me, and so then they move away from religion and they say, how can I believe in this when they saying God takes a human form, an anthropomorphic God, and this is how everything works? How can I believe in that when all evidence in my life points in the other direction? And so people move away from God. And I just want to be clear, I don't think that religions are a negative force in the world. I think they are a positive force. I think the world is a better place for religion because of religions. And if I were to have the power to instantaneously click my fingers and say whether religion should continue to exist or be wiped off the face of the earth, all memory of it gone, I would say it should still exist. Okay, and maybe that's naive. I haven't really thought about that all that much. But the reason I say that is because it offers people, for one, faith, and it also offers them a moral structure, some sort of moral framework to, it's like school when you go to your religious ceremonies, it's like school for morality or for ethics, that type of thing. And then it also gives people community. So for those reasons, I think it's generally a force for good. as opposed to a forceful bad. But I think that could also be argued. And I also want to say that my views on religion are mostly, well, not mostly, but predominantly to a large extent influenced by Jordan Peterson, for one, hearing him speak about God, and then for two, also the Stoics and Seneca in particular. And I was introduced to the Stoics and Seneca through watching the YouTube channel Accepting the Universe. Okay, it's really good. I would recommend it. It's a philosophy-based channel, and he basically goes through concepts and things about living a more morally virtuous life in whatever form that takes. And I think a lot of his ideas are informed by the great philosophers of history, particularly Seneca and Seneca's letters on ethics. Okay, so why is it informed by this? Well, Jordan Peterson once said that God was, the definition of God was the spirit of a moral decision. And I fundamentally believe that to be true. So I then, taking that view, or rather putting it differently, thinking of God as the intersection of all that which is good. So the purest form of good, the ideal. And I'm not going to say the ideal what, but I'm just going to say the ideal, the purest form of good, and not good in the sense of a machine works well and thus this is a good machine, rather moral goodness. Okay, so moral virtue then, so the spirit of a moral decision, the intersection of all goodness. This is what I believe God to be. So I don't necessarily believe that my views of religion and God contradict any religion's sentiments. I just don't hold a lot of the extreme views where things start to be taken more literally. And I do believe that the Bible, the Quran, even though I haven't read them, but I still believe that they have fundamentally good lessons that are rooted, for the most part, of course I haven't read it so I can't say, in truth and in directing oneself towards the highest moral virtue, the highest form of goodness, and that being God. So I think another thing that's could help explain the way I think about God and religion is if you think about the laws of the universe, the physical universe being the laws of physics, okay? There's gravity, all these things govern the universe. If you click your finger, you hear a sound, this type of thing. These are the natural laws that govern the universe. And these exist in the 3 dimensions that we can perceive. So these 3 dimensions that we exist in right now have the first dimension, which is just a point, if I say, and then, or a line. So 0 dimensions just puts me at a point. No space, just a point. Then 1 dimension, I can extend an infinite number of points along a line. So I get a line, that's 1 dimensional. 2 dimensional, I can stack lines infinitely and it becomes a plane. 3 dimension, I can stack planes infinitely and I can get space. Now 3 dimensions is what we live in. The laws of the universe govern these 3 dimensions. If I saw a video once, someone explained it like this: if you had a stick figure and you drew it on a piece of paper, it lives in those in that 2 dimension, in that plane. It can't exit that plane. The stick figure can't come out the page. And you, in this 3rd dimension, are governing that stick figure. Okay? So you governing those 2 dimensions, you can enter those 2 dimensions and see them from the perspective of this 3rd dimension, from planes above that being. Okay? Just as the stick figure can draw a line in that plane, and on the line, if there was some eye, it can only see forward or backwards along that line and can't see the stick figure who drew the line. So with the addition of extra dimensions, you can see the previous dimension. And so I believe that God, religion, operates in this 4th dimension. And I believe that the laws of the 4th dimension that operate on these 3 dimensions is the laws of morality, the underlying ethical and moral truths to the universe. So I do believe there is some maybe I don't, but this is why I'm somewhat influenced by the Stoics, because they believe in a rational order to the world. Everything happens for some particular reason, and I don't mean happens for a reason like, and they didn't mean this either, like something gets stolen and it's because you didn't deserve to have that thing. It's rather like something gets stolen because this person was inclined to do this particular thing and you were in this position, and so it happened as a consequence of reality. That's what I mean by things happen for a reason. There's a rational order to the universe. Everything can be explained. If something moves, there was a force that acted upon it. And so the laws of the universe in these 3 dimensions that we can see, those are the physical laws, the physical forces. You can actually feel these forces. And then the 4th dimension that acts on us, where we have emotions and where we have other forms of being, where it's not just physical, we can get hurt on emotional levels, we can think, we have consciousness. This all exists in a 4th dimension. Okay, so the laws and the forces now that are acting are forces of morality. And in order to live the best possible life, we must align ourselves with the highest possible good. And this is religion for me. It's constantly seeking to discover where this highest form of good is, where the intersection of all good is, and aligning myself with that and moving towards that. And if I am moving towards that progressively, and even if I make mistakes, if I correct them, if I repent, if I am truly sorry and I direct myself after that and iterate and become better, then I am moving closer to God. And I'll never reach that, but I want to get as close as I possibly can to God. And this is my religious framework. This is my faith. And I think it appeals to a lot of people, and I don't think it necessarily contradicts any religion. So if you were to listen to what I said in isolation about the forces of morality and God being the highest possible good, I don't think any religion would say to you, no, I don't believe in that. Of course, I'm not an expert, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anyone would necessarily say, no, this guy is completely off his top, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I think most religious people would be inclined to agree. And so I think this view is that I have about God being the intersection of everything that's morally good, the highest moral virtue. I believe that this intersection is what underpins all religions at a fundamental level, which is why I don't think it necessarily contradicts any religion. Now, of course, my particular views, where they become more nuanced, and I reject the metaphors as being literal events that occurred. When I reject those, then of course we can now have contradictions with other people and people can start to argue with me. But I don't believe there's anything wrong with God being the highest form of good and this morality acting as forces in the 4th dimension. Maybe some extra clarity for what I think about the 4th dimension. So I said 0 dimensions is just a point. 1 dimension is many points in a line, so you extend them, an infinite number of points connected. Plane is infinite number of lines connected. Then a 3D area is an infinite number of planes stacked. Now 4th dimension is at each point in this particular 4th dimension is at each point in this 3D field you have another value. Okay, so if I were to think of 0 dimensions as a point, 1 dimensions as a line, 2 dimensions as a plane, 3 dimensions as an object, some sort of volume, then 4 dimensions will be each point in that object has a certain property. So you can think of this as a cube of metal. At each particular atom in that metal, at each little point within that 3D object, there is a temperature, say. And this temperature will define the 4th dimension of that object. And then if you wanted to move into 5 dimensions, you could also include coordinates within each point. So the point in this particular object has a temperature, and let's say it also has a density. So now I'm in my 5 dimensions with that. 3 dimensions, I can also say that each point in here has its behavior governed by some other 3D object. So it has 3 points of information for that particular point. So this is just was probably a kind of a tangent explaining 4 dimensions. Yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm not going to just carry on talking for the sake of it, but I'm interested to hear what everybody else thinks about this, and whether you think I've gone astray or missed something particularly valuable that I shouldn't have missed, or am just completely misguided. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave them in the comment section below.